What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving my recap, reaction, and review of the third episode of the STARZ historical romance drama series, Outlander, Blood of My Blood. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So far, I've enjoyed this series, and I won't lie, I wasn't exactly sure I would. See, initially, I didn't think there was enough to warrant a whole other show. In fact, I think OG Outlander should have ended a season or two ago, because we definitely could have done without season 6. But this show has done a really good job of what I call taking care of outstanding business. Being able to see some of the major events involving Clan Mackenzie that we only heard about through dialogue in the original show has been really interesting. Now, add to that the revelation that Claire's parents didn't die in a car accident when she was a kid, that they actually both went through the stones, explaining why Claire herself might be a traveler is an interesting plot point in and of itself. In addition to the fact that her parents were then separated in the past, making for an interesting plot that rests in contrast to the arc that Claire had with Frank in the original series, being that they were separated but Frank stayed in the present and Claire went to the past. In addition to all that, Claire may have a sister out there somewhere in the past, which is something else that just kind of raises the level of interest in this particular series. Suffice it to say, 2 fairly long episodes in, I find myself fairly invested, especially in the plight of Henry and Julia, mostly because it's them and their future that is the real question mark in this story, given that we already know Brian and Ellen's fate. Now, in episode 3, entitled School of the Moon, we see that Ellen has become completely enthralled by the idea of being with Brian, to the point where she's having nasty dreams about him. And this is kind of interesting because, you're not dealing with somebody who would be sexually experienced. These women are virgins. So the fact that she's having these dreams about Brian is kind of interesting. But she wakes from said dream to find that she's been promised to another by her brother Colum. She's been promised to Malcolm Grant. And Colum is doing this to basically get the Grants on his side so that he can be voted in as the Lord of Clan Mackenzie. And, the Grants kind of have beef with the Mackenzies. So he's like, well, I'll offer them my sister's hand. We know that from last episode. He was kind of talking to Dougal about that. And so as soon as Ellen wakes from her nasty dream and she finds out that she's been promised to Colum, promised to Malcolm Grant, she immediately goes to Colum and it's like, how could you do this to me? Dad would never allow such a thing. And Colum just kind of tells her straight up, hey, look, Dad's promises died with him. And so did your privileges. You're like, damn, Colum, it's like that. And so she tries to undermine her brother's efforts to marry her off throughout this episode. But in doing so, she actually gets promised to a different clan by Dougal in exchange for the Jacobite support. And this was an interesting plot point because if you remember from the OG series, Dougal was deeply, deeply involved in the Jacobite cause. And so we kind of start to see at least if you don't want to say the beginnings of that, but you see that kind of in full swing here with Dougal as a young man. And I find that to be interesting as well. The Jacobite rebellions is something that in the Outlander series was a big part of the first few seasons of the Outlander series, something that I took great interest in because I like all the stuff about wars and stuff like that. So, but getting back to the episode, Ellen basically spends the entirety of the episode trying to figure out how to escape the metaphorical prison of arranged marriage. And you might remember that in a flashback scene in the previous episode, she spoke with her dad about him giving her the tools to be able to do just that. Now, This part of the series and the episode plot is simply the runner, leading us to what I believe will be Ellen and Brian eventually running away together. Something that we kind of already know happens because of Jamie's backstory in OG Outlander. This has already kind of been explained to us. Now, we also see how it is that Colum sustained the injuries that we see him struggle with in the OG series. And this was kind of heartbreaking a bit, man. You know, once we actually saw him injured himself twice instead of just the once. You know, once being thrown from his horse during a failed raid that his father sent him and Dougal on. And then, you know, again, after spending days bedridden from being thrown from his horse, you know, until his father basically berated him for being soft, causing him to get out of bed prematurely and chase his father around the castle, ultimately falling down the stairs and essentially breaking his body into several pieces, it looked like. And I would have to assume that, you know, because the way that he walked and everything in the OG series is probably just from his arms and legs never healing quite right. Because, I mean, all you could do is set the bone and just kind of be like, hey, man, you know, do what you can do. I mean, they ain't got no casts or nothing like that back during this time. So it's just like, we're going to set the bones, lay your behind still. And if you don't, then you end up like old Colum did in the OG Outlander series. Now, furthermore, we get the chance to see how it is that Colum became Lord of Clan Mackenzie to begin with, and how Dougal became its war chief. And this plot point, you know, had a lot of political intrigue. And what I found to be the most interesting part of all this was that it was Ellen who essentially moved the chess pieces around the board behind the scenes and essentially made it happen. And I thought this was more taking care of the outstanding business from the previous show, while also reinforcing the idea that Ellen's the smartest of the whole clan, and that if she had simply been born a man, she would have undoubtedly been Lord of Clan Mackenzie. Now, on the B side of the episode, we find Julia trying to explain the fact that she's been with Lord Lovett at Castle Leathers now for over a month, and she has yet to bleed. These chicks nosy, boy. They pulling back your bed sheets going, hey, why you ain't bled yet, shawty? Like, what? Now, of course, we know that Julia is pregnant, but the issue at hand is that Davina Porter, who's, I guess, like the head housemaid, is kind of explaining that if Lord Lovett should find out that Julia is pregnant, that he might, you know, if she doesn't take measures to end her pregnancy herself, which Davina Porter is trying to help her do, that Lord Lovett may end her pregnancy in a way that is most undesirable, if you feel me, right? But Julia, you know, putting two and two together, realizes that Brian is Lord Lovett's bastard son, born of his sexual relationship with Davina Porter, where, you know, you get the sense that Lord Lovett may have at least gently forced himself on Davina Porter, and Brian is the result. And so once she kind of calls this out to Davina Porter, Davina says, well, look, man, you know, if, you know, my son is Lord Lovett's son, your son or your baby ain't. So, you know, you're unmarried, you can't leave, you know, so if you don't take care of this, you might find yourself in a precarious situation. And so after a while, Julia comes up with quite the plan in order to save the life of her and Henry's unborn child. It's kind of wild. Now, meanwhile, my man Murtaugh convinces Brian to leave the gathering because he's butthurt about Ellen's betrothal. He's heard that she's promised to Malcolm Grant. And he actually tells Brian this, so the two of them return to Castle Leathers, and Brian seems all too happy to explain the goings-on at the gathering to Lord Lovett, his father. Now, Brian does this in the hopes that Lord Lovett will come up with a plan to stop Ellen from being married to the Grants, because we find out here that the Grants are in league with Lord Lovett, and he doesn't want that to change because Clan Mackenzie offers him, you know, Ellen's hand. And so, you know, but Murtaugh gets kind of happy because he thinks that Brian does this to clear the path for him to finally go ahead and shoot his shot. But he still doesn't know that Brian fancies Ellen as well. So that should make for a really interesting revelation later on this season. You know, drama's coming in that regard. I can see it coming from a mile away, that drama's coming. And so, you know, That you got to remember that when Brian first learned her name when they were standing at the bridge, that's why he was looking like, oh shit, because he knows that's Murtaugh don't do nothing but talk about this chick. Like, he gonna be mad when he find out that Shawty actually like me. And look, I gotta say, the women in this story are some tough broads, right? Both Julia and Ellen, and so was Claire. But it made sense because Claire was a combat nurse. Julia was military adjacent. You know what I'm saying? I was more impressed with Brianna because Brianna came from like the 70s and she had to kind of, learn to kind of be a little tougher and stuff like that. Whereas like I said, Claire had been through an actual war. You know what I mean? Now here, Julia's kind of been through a war. We're not talking about the Blitz in London, but the first attack in London during World War I was still, you still got, buildings being bombed and stuff like that. So mentally, Julia's pretty tough. You know what I'm saying? But again, so I suppose that's reflective of the times that these women live in, because even with Ellen, you can't be no soft chick and live in the 1700s. Life was difficult. And Julia sleeping with Lord Lovett so as to convince him that the child she's carrying is his instead of her long lost husband's is absolutely diabolical in theory. But I could see how she would think it absolutely necessary in practice, right? But man, like. I guess when you're Henry and you finally track her down, you ain't gonna like it, but you gotta do what you gotta do, right? Because we understand that Julia wants Lord Lovett to take care of her and her child, at least while she's there at Castle Leathers with him, until she can figure out how to maybe escape. And she sees that, again, he likes to gently force himself on his housemaids. And, Davina Porter's been kind of warning her since the very first episode, hey, don't hang around him without me around, because just do what I tell you. You know what I mean? And she also sees that he's taking care of Brian, again, who's his bastard son. So she assumes that he will do the same for her and her child, when the time comes. And, look, this was a heck of a way to end an episode, right? And it makes you look forward to the next episode, which is essentially everything that you would want from a final scene as a screenwriter. So in that regard, mission accomplished. Gold star for the writers. Now, overall, I'd give this episode an 80% or an 8.0 if you're thinking IMDb score. So, look, you guys know I'm not usually a fan of prequel series, I'll say again, mainly because retconning an entire television series is an extremely difficult thing to accomplish. Given all the writers and things like that might have their hands on a series over the course of, say, for example, in this case, an 8-season, story, you really, really, really have to have not just your note cards in order, but you have to have the note cards in order of everyone who's ever touched the series, because when you retcon an entire series, you really can't make a mistake, right? The pieces of the puzzle have to fit together with expert precision, or else you've got a shit show on your hands. But here, Outlander Blood of My Blood has kind of proven itself to be the exception to that particular rule. And as we get deeper into the thick of things, narratively speaking, it's becoming clear where this season of the show is headed, again, especially where Brian and Ellen are concerned. Now, as for what the end point of the season arcs of the other two main characters, Henry and Julia, are concerned, I'm not quite sure yet what to expect. But whatever does happen, I'm fairly certain at this point that I can trust the writers of this show to deliver something truly worth watching. But what do you guys think? Have you had the chance to watch the third episode of Outlander Blood of My Blood yet? If you have, how do you think the episode continued to fill in the blanks left from the original series? What did you think of Julia's decision to sleep with Lord Lovett at the end of the episode? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to subscribe to my new shorts channel for additional content. The link is in the description. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all on the next video.